All right, welcome to Ever Vigilant Podcast. I will be hosting the show tonight. My name is Joe Prim, and we are going to do an after action report on a storm we had last week on the homestead. I think it's very important when issues arise or we're kind of put to the test that we look back at what we did right and what we could have done better. And I've taken some notes and we've kind of discussed things as a family, and I'm going to share my ideas and thoughts on where the things that we've missed out on or haven't quite thought through clearly, and things that actually made me feel better about our preparations for storms. So let me kind of set this up with a little bit of a story about what happened with the storm, and then we'll kind of go from there. The storm itself happened last week, and it wasn't very long of a storm, but it hit very hard, and we had some gusts of winds that were upwards of 70 miles per hour, and we had two big trees blow down on our property. The one maple tree that was near the house was probably in excess of 40 years old. So it was a very tall tree, a very big tree, and it narrowly missed the house when it fell. And we, as a family, were all standing out, looking out the window at the sheer awesomeness of this storm as the tree blew over. If the tree had hit the house, this podcast would be very different. We were not in a good spot relative to that tree. We were all very close to the side of the house where the tree fell. If the tree had fallen on the house, there could have been severe injuries, or if branches had blown out the windows where we were standing, we could have also been severely injured. So as we look at this here, we all survived this short but dangerous storm. None of us in our family were hurt. The dogs, Brutus and Elsa, were fine. The goats, Edmund and Peter and Susan and Lucy, made it through unscathed. All the chickens and all the ducks all survived the storm. So that is the most important thing. We did have damage. A second tree fell down on the property. Another big tall tree fell smack right on top of the chicken tractor and crushed that. And the Texas Prepper greenhouse blew away and was completely destroyed for the second time. I'm not so sure that I'll be able to rebuild it and throw it all back together like the last time. To be honest, I haven't had much of a chance to look at what's going to be involved in the repairs. It's frustrating because we did invest in a nice real greenhouse cover for it, and that may or may not be salvageable. But again, we go back to things that can be replaced and redone versus things that can't be replaced. And though it's frustrating because you put a lot of, you put time and effort into building that chicken tractor in this greenhouse that you expect to be around and be using for the next 5 years. Once you got it built, you're kind of the mindset that you can move on to other things. But these things happen. And, I learned after the first greenhouse blew away that I needed to anchor it down. But this storm was so severe that it actually left the stakes in the ground and pulled out the 3-inch deck screws. So I'm not sure I could have anchored it better, but according to our neighbors and the people that lived in this area, it was a very freak storm, and that type of wind and that type of damage is very rare for this area. So I'm not sure that there was much more I could have done to that or with the greenhouse in order to keep it in its place. I think it almost becomes just a gigantic kite and blew away. I will look into salvaging it, and we will try again and try to find a way to anchor it. But the good news that came of the greenhouse blowing away is that there were our shelves on either side of the greenhouse, of course, and all of our garden seedlings have been thriving and doing very well in there, or I should say were. And when I came home from work, which was maybe 20 minutes before the storm really hit, the winds were blowing, and I noticed that the seedlings all on the shelves were vibrating in there and were very close to falling off the shelves. So quick thinking, I decided I will take all of them off of the shelves and I'll just set them on the ground. And that ended up saving all of our watermelons and beans and snap peas and eggplants and cabbages and everything else that we had planted in there, and the time that went in and the effort that went in ended up, that one move ahead of the storm ended up saving, I would say, 90% of the seedlings. So again, things that couldn't be replaced or would be extremely difficult to replace weren't ruined. And I was able to run out after the brunt of the storm went through and it was just raining out. And I'll tell you what, that was the coldest rain I've ever been, and it took my breath away as I went out the door. But I was concerned about salvaging the seedlings for the garden, and we were able to. They've been in the house safe and sound since then, and are continuing to grow well, and will probably be most of them planted this weekend, here at the end of May, actually Memorial Day weekend. So the other thing is the power went out, and this was where the test really came in. The storm came in, hit real hard, was over quick. We had a long night of tornado warnings and severe thunderstorm warning. So we spent several hours in the basement, hunkered down and trying to entertain ourselves. What became more of an issue was the 36 hours that we went without power. So that became the challenge. And it really wasn't as much of a challenge as I probably would have thought that it was going to be. But I think that might be just our lifestyle at the moment. So let's get into a little bit of what we did right. What we did right is I saw there was an issue or a potential issue with the greenhouse, so I was able to save those seedlings. We did that right. That was a good lesson. It might be better to put those seedlings or the planted seeds on the ground in the greenhouse versus putting them on the shelf, even in the future. Something to think about. We did have plenty of water on hand because the electric went out, so did the well pump. We had plenty of bottled water and other water on hand, so that was never an issue for us. The other thing that is interesting that I was able to make good use of was and I'll look at it here on Amazon, it's a Cobra 800 watt power inverter. And what we use that for, and what that inverter does is you can hook it up to the battery while your vehicle is running, and then you can plug in, as long as it's less than 800 watts, and that might be peak, you can run power and use your vehicle as a generator. That 800 watt inverter costs, let me look at it real quick, I think $50, and I think they have a 1200 watt inverter that is $90. I had the 800 watt. It served us well. The only thing that we really needed that for, and where it really saved us, was all the chicks that we have in our brooders right now. If I didn't have that inverter, we probably would have lost all of our chicks. So Other times of the year, it would not have been an issue going without the power, or not having this inverter and just using flashlights or lights around the house for what we needed them for. Because you can also power up other things with this inverter, a strand of Christmas lights or small lights you could light up. You can make sure you keep your phones charged, and things like that. You can't do a lot with 800 watts, but you can power up a decent amount of things. But normally it would not have been a problem. But being able to keep the heat lamps on the brooder and keep our chicks alive at this time of year saved us a lot. That's why that's on the what we did right side of the list. Another thing was last year I purchased a portable gas stove, just a small, inexpensive one off of Amazon. Right now I'm looking at it. It's $22. Comes with a carrying case. It's not like a backpack stove. It's not one of those small cylinder type stoves. It's actually maybe 4 inches tall by 18 by 18 or 24 by 18 or something inches. So it's a decent size. You don't have to worry about it falling over, blowing over, or trying to balance a pot on it. And I had never used it. I mean, if you purchase something to use in an emergency or even for when you go camping, you should probably use it and get familiar with it before you try it. When I got up the next morning, I was able to heat up my water for my coffee, and later in the day was able to boil water to make macaroni. So I was very impressed. It's a little butane. It uses the butane gas cylinders. It worked great. I have no complaints. How much gas exactly we used boiling water 2 or 3 times, I'm not sure, but I was very impressed. It makes a big difference when you can just pull out something simple like that, hook up a gas cylinder, and be cooking with gas, right? And this is, again, because we do have electric range. We don't have gas or propane on our property, so everything we have runs on electric. But this was a great substitute, and I'm guessing I'll at least be buying another case of the butane gas, and may buy another stove because they're so inexpensive, just because 1 is none and 2 is 1, and being able to have an extra one on hand may make all the difference, or being able to lend one out to a neighbor or do a couple things at once may make a big difference. I was very impressed by how simple and how easy it worked. Again, it's not like a backpack stove where you're trying to balance anything. It's nice and stable. We're able to put it right on top of the electric range and use it right there, and it worked very well. Another thing on the do it right was we had cash on hand. That ended up becoming an issue when my wife went out later in the day to go buy ice and grab something to eat for dinner. A lot of the stores had their power out and were only accepting cash. So we did have some cash. That's also on the things we could have done better. She wishes she had brought more cash with her, and now my wife kind of understands that it's important to have some cash with her at all times, just in case you run into an emergency situation like what happened. Another thing was good was we had extra gas on hand. I try to keep several gas cans filled, and that proved important in keeping the Jeep running in order to power up the brooder lights. And then the other thing I have on the list is a big cooler. Once my wife was able to purchase some ice, we were able to take the things that were in the refrigerator, throw them into the cooler, and we're able to salvage the majority of our food, except for the ice cream, which was kind of fun. We got to eat a lot of ice cream for dessert that next night, and everybody ate their fill and everybody ate their fill of cherries, and everybody ate their fill of chocolate topping because we weren't sure how long the power would be out, and we weren't sure what we were going to be able to salvage. Make sure you're having fun when you go through these situations, and don't make them any more stressful than they need to be. Enjoy what you can enjoy, and find joy in the small things. So we made that into some fun. And another thing on the Do It Right would be that we had entertainment down in the basement. When we had to go down in the basement, we don't have a finished basement, but my wife had a couple of books down there, and she was able to read to the kids, and that helped calm them down and relax them, and they really enjoyed listening to the stories. And you can turn a situation that not only could have been worse, but could have been very scary and traumatizing to small kids that are watching things get ruined out the window, and to be able to kind of take the stress off and listen to a story and be laughing and joking as the evening wore on, and as the alarms continued to sound on the tornado warnings, etc., that they were able to keep their minds off of the storm and listen to an enjoyable story. We'll get into the things we could do better. Like I touched on a minute ago, carrying cash with you is important. You never know when the power will be out or how long it will be out. Probably no matter how well you try to plan ahead, there's going to be something that you need or something that would make things a little bit better, even if it's being able to pick up dinner so you don't have to try to cook dinner if it's only going to be a few nights. The other was filling the freezer with water jugs. We lost 4 or 5 birds, and that was basically all that was left in our chest freezer downstairs in the basement. It's frustrating because those are birds that we put a lot of investment into, a lot of time and energy. They all came from our property. I think it was probably a couple ducks and 2 or 3 chickens that we had raised and butchered on site here. And so to lose them and to the garbage and to have to throw them away is disappointing in the least. In thinking this through and trying to figure out what we could have done better, I remembered something that I had heard, probably on the Survival Podcast. What you should do on a chest freezer is any space that you have available should be filled up with water jugs. Whether you fill 2-liter pop bottles with water, or we have 1-gallon water jugs that we refill. Fill those up. Fill up your freezer with those, or any extra space. That way, when the power goes out, you have a lot of ice in there that needs to melt before the temperature will drop below freezing. If we had done that, because again, like I said, we didn't have a lot of stuff in there. There was a lot of space in that freezer. If I had filled up the rest of that freezer with water bottles, I think I probably would have been able to save everything that was in there. So that was a mistake that I made. Lesson learned. The freezer was cleaned out and filled up with water right now. So, and the other thing too about that is you're not losing any of the water. You can transfer those bottles in and out as you need the space. And come summertime, or if there is a situation like this, you can always pull that out and have cold water when you may need it. Another thing that we learned, since we have the well, and when the electricity goes out, we lose water, but we don't lose it right away. We have some water that's still in the pipes and still pressurized. Next time we will fill the sinks, make sure that we have a sink filled in the kitchen so we can rinse off dishes, and a sink filled upstairs so that we can wash our hands, etc. Just a little bit of extra water for those things, because again, when your power goes out, you don't know how long it's going to be. It could be 15 minutes, could be 12 hours, it could end up being 36 hours like it was for us, or it could end up being a week. And some of the things like that are very short term and would only last so long for washing your hands. But if your power is only out for 12 hours or less, that could really make a big difference for us. Another thing that this kind of made me realize the importance of is rainwater collection. That is on my list of things to do around here, but this probably moved it up on that list because if we had had rainwater collected, it would have made things even easier for us. Then we would have known that no matter how long really the water was out or the electricity was out, that we would have water for cleanup, washing hands, flushing toilets, etc. for a long time. So that kind of got bumped up on the list of things to do. Another thing would be a hand pump for the well. I think that would be a good move and a good investment for us, and something that I will definitely be looking more into. That way, no matter how long the electricity goes out for, even if it's out indefinitely, we could still pump water out of the well by hand. That would be helpful. I mean, as far as water's concerned, we do have a creek on the property. I'm not sure how contaminated that water is, but we do have a big Berkey to filter that water and make it drinkable. We have other ways to filter water. So that's probably why the hand pump on the well and the rainwater collection have not been as high on the list as they could be. But having the more options you can have to get water, the better, because you cannot go very long without water. And another thing you quickly start to realize when you don't have water is how many things you do that you need water, whether it be washing your hands, whether it be cleaning yourself up, whether it be flushing the toilet. Sanitation can become an issue, I would imagine, very, very quickly. Again, this is not a huge test. This was only 36 hours without power. In reality, that's nothing. But this was a chance for us to put ourselves to the test a little bit and then assess where we are at. I would give ourselves a pretty decent grade, because even the things that we didn't do right were not things that had affected us in a totally adverse way. We can always be improving, and this was a good learning experience for all of us. And I like to take things like this and share them with the family, sit down, talk these things through. My wife threw out simple things like, well, we should have more paper plates. We should make sure that we have plastic silverware, because washing dishes in a short-term circumstance like this is super difficult. So there are just simple things like that if you start to look at it or start to think about it, start to make sense. That's what we learned. And another thing that was very interesting to learn and very cool was after that tree fell down and it took out the service and landed in another tree, and I knew I needed to get it out of there so I could get the power hooked back up, and I was not sure how I was going to get this tree that fell out of the other tree. And I don't think I was outside looking at this that next morning for more than 15, 20 minutes trying to come up with a game plan for how I was going to try to accomplish this, when my neighbors pulled up and saw what was going on and came up with a game plan and came back over with their tractor and pulled the tree that had fallen down out of the other tree in order to make it easy to cut up and get ready for putting on into the woodshed. And for that, I'm very grateful to have neighbors like that would step up and help you. To them, I don't think that they thought it was that big of a deal, hooking up their tractor to that and 4 minutes later pulling the tree free. But for me, that saved me not only a lot of extra work, but also putting myself in more of a dangerous predicament. So I'm very grateful for having people around that can do things like that. And until these situations like this arise, sometimes you don't know what you have around you, or the people that are around you, or the people that are looking out for you or trying to help you. And it's important that we also be those people, that we're not just the ones that are on that receiving end, but that we are making every effort to be the people on the giving end of that, to help out and lend a helping hand. On the homestead, things are looking good. Everything seems to be coming back slowly but surely. I did some moving around. I wanted to reorganize some of the pastures, and change up some of the locations of some of the trees. So we moved a couple trees around, moved a couple of the raspberry from the locations where they were at to set things up, I think, in a little bit better way. Moved a couple of the sea berries around that had been planted kind of in a rush, and I feel better about their locations. Everything seems to have done well in being moved around. We have a lot of watermelon plants and cantaloupe, cucumbers, squash, summer squash, and winter squash that we will be planting this weekend and getting into the ground, and that's exciting. So that's going good. So I wanted to close this out with kind of a funny story that happened today. Is one of those things that makes me think that there's something bigger than ourselves out there. And I believe that there's a God. You may not. But these are the types of things that I don't think just happen. So I moved those trees around this last week and have a couple of locations where I wanted to plant something new. And I was kind of been running through my mind what type of tree I'd like to plant, what we should put in. We have persimmons on the property, cherry plums, apples, pawpaws, peaches, pears, along with a lot of other, bushes and things, and chestnut trees. But I was trying to think of what would be another good tree or two to plant on the property. So, as I like to do in our driving around today, I threw it out to the family. What would be something that we should plant? What should we plant on the property here as far as a tree? I'm getting the lemons and citrus, and I'm having to explain to the kids that no, we can't plant any citrus, that those are for warmer climates, and going into why certain plants won't grow where we're at. No avocados and bananas, and my son pipes in plums. I said, bingo, buddy, you got it. That's exactly the type of thing I'm looking for. You hit the nail on the head, bud. Great idea. That will be perfect. That's what we will do. We will look for a plum tree. So as we continued to talk about it and try to come up with some other ideas, I came up with cherries. So it's like, okay, guys, we'll look for cherries and plum trees. So we were out of town today, and on the way back, we were going to stop at Home Depot and pick up some charcoal. So we stop at Home Depot and pick up some charcoal, and of course work our way over to the nursery section. And my wife likes to look at the flowers and come up with different ideas. So she's looking at the flowers. I'm of course looking at, the berry bushes and fruit trees. And we come to this bin of trees that are half off, $7.50 per tree. So as we're looking through this bin, I kind of take a quick gander, and it just looks like shade trees. I see some trees with, purple flowers, and there's some other trees in there with white flowers, and some other trees in there with pink flowers on them, on the labels. So as I'm looking through a little bit, I kind of start to think that, oh, there's no fruit trees in here. This is all shade trees. So as I'm looking through this, and my son's kind of behind me looking at some other stuff, as he walks over to the bin, he reaches in and he grabs out a tree and says, "How about the plum tree, Dad?" And I couldn't believe it and didn't believe it at first. And I had to look down, and sure enough, there in his hands he was holding a plum tree. Now we looked and looked and looked through that bin and we couldn't find any others, but there was the one plum tree. So we put that in the cart and said, okay, we'll get this plum tree. So as I'm searching through the bin, again, not having no luck, and the big bin, but not organized whatsoever. So as we're looking through, no, some apple trees, and then I think there were some peach trees, but nothing, no more plum trees. And then I happened to pull out a cherry tree. So we bought our cherry tree and our plum tree, and the last plum tree and the last cherry tree in the bin. And I couldn't help but remind my kids that, see, there's something bigger than us out there. If as a family we come up with, and my son came up with the idea of plums, and not 10 hours later we're digging through the clearance bin at Home Depot of trees and happen to find a cherry tree and a plum tree, I'll take it. So that was kind of an exciting, fun thing that happened to us today. And since it is Memorial Day weekend, I do want to sincerely say thank you to the families and thank you to the soldiers that have made huge sacrifices for us in this country. Many have died through the years and left behind children and wives and brothers and sisters and moms and dads that will look at this Memorial Day completely different than most of us. And to you, survivors of those that have fallen, thank you. It's very, very humbling to even think about it. I have close family that has fought in the last wars and in previous wars, and I am grateful that they have all come home. And again, those who have served and came back, thanks to you, because you did put it on the line and you could not have come back. So to you, to those that served and risked not coming home and risked your future lives, I do again say thank you. I didn't serve myself, but again, I'm close to many that have, and I am very grateful that my family members came home mostly in one piece, and I would be completely wrong if I didn't mention that in this Memorial Day weekend. To those that have never listened to this podcast before, I do hope that you enjoyed this program and that you may have learned something, or at least enjoyed my rambling on about what's going on in my life. To those that have listened before, thanks for coming back. I do appreciate it, and I hope that you also got something out of this. Those that have come back or those that like the show, I would appreciate it if you tell some friends, put it on Facebook, mention it to people, give me a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, wherever you listen. I would be very appreciative of that. And you can send me an email at evervigilantpodcast@gmail.com. I would appreciate any suggestions for topics, any thoughts on the show, because I'm always trying to make the show better and improve week by week on what I'm putting out there. So again, to all our veterans, thank you for serving. Thank you for putting it all on the line for our country and standing up for what you believe in. And thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy your Memorial Day weekend and that you stay safe. And don't forget the 3 F's: faith, family, and freedom.